Story 1. He became my coworker and friend after high school. I discovered that his trauma is the root of some of my own trauma, and he apologized. He matured, I forgave him, and he is now a married electrician with 2 children. I attended his wedding. Story 2. He changed and went around actively apologizing to everyone in our class, including me, even though he didn't do anything to me. He actually meant it. Story 3. He is serving a life sentence in prison. He and another individual robbed an elderly couple living on a farm and killed them both. I hope he never gets out. Story 4. I remember getting bullied pretty badly in 10th grade. In 11th grade, our school banned paddling as a punishment under a new law but switched to buck rags for discipline instead. They also became a lot stricter about bullying, as was common in the culture at the time. If you're not familiar with the discipline method, goat farmers can make these rags that are thoroughly wiped all over male goats in rut and then stored in jars. They sell them ostensibly to other goat farmers for goat breeding purposes, like checking if female goats are in heat, but in some areas, 99% of their customers are using the rags for child discipline. You make the misbehaving child put their nose in the jar for 2 to 5 minutes. It smells. Our vice principal had one of these rags. He couldn't even keep the closed jar in his office, so he kept it in a shed out back. If you were caught bullying, your nose went in there. Many students complained, but parents tended to be strongly supportive. Personally, I loved that they did this, combined with the stronger anti-bullying policy. Bullying and class disruption went way down. There was one kid who still tried to bully me early in the school year, but it only took one trip to the vice principal to set him straight. I swear I could still smell it on him from a distance of 10 feet the next school day. Story 5. When everyone started connecting with each other on Facebook, he kept trying repeatedly. I finally sent a message. I told you to leave me alone 10 years ago. I never heard from him since. Story 6. My bully fell hard. In high school, he drove a mint 1960s muscle car. He dated the most popular girl in school, who we heard was heavily using her trust fund. I never saw the finances, but I remember the times they sat in cars at parties using cocaine. My bully once punched me so hard that I damaged the drywall in the classroom, all because he had just fought with the popular girl and needed to hit someone. One day, he totaled the muscle car while drinking. A few days later, he had a new muscle car, just as nice, and this became a pattern for a while. Then, after totaling another mint muscle car, he showed up in a pretty beat-up vehicle. His father apparently cut him off. The popular girl broke up with him, and his friends took a step back. I don't remember if he graduated. I was concerned that this person would always be in my life, but thankfully he disappeared. The last I heard, he was working as a cashier at a small-town gas station and living in a trailer. Part of me always wanted to drive to the town, find him working, and laugh at him. The truth is, no amount of revenge on my part could ever equal what life had done to him. Story 7. She bullied me for being overweight, even though her entire family is also overweight. She is doing okay, but her father passed away from a heart attack and her sister suffered from complications related to unmanaged diabetes. Story 8. He went to medical school and is now a world-renowned trauma surgeon at Johns Hopkins. I certainly showed him. Story 9. They are deceased. It was a group of 4 friends who were genuinely undesirable individuals. They likely only graduated because their parents had money and somehow got into the same Ivy League school. One night in college, they went out partying without a designated driver. The driver, who was well over the legal limit, crashed his expensive SUV into a tree after speeding at 80 miles per hour in a 45 zone at 2 a.m. The 2 passengers on the front side died on impact, while the rear passenger died later at the hospital. The driver was the only survivor, severely injured. He later took his own life due to guilt and because the parents of the other deceased individuals planned to sue for wrongful death, leading to his expulsion from the university. Additionally, it later emerged that the 4 had gang-raped 2 girls at the university during another party. Rumors circulated that the crash was not an accident and that they had intended to die because they had filmed their actions. Somehow, someone acquired the video and either shared it with the police or planned to do so. Honestly, they got what was coming to them. They never faced any consequences growing up, typical of wealthy kids who always had their parents rushing to fix whatever problems they caused, often just to cover their own mistakes. Moreover, one of them exhibited inappropriate behavior towards his younger sisters, leading many to suspect that he was doing something harmful at home. I was not close to them, but a few friends of mine were due to sports. Whenever their brother was around, they appeared to be entirely different people. They were decent individuals, albeit a bit spoiled by their family's wealth. It amazed me that they came from the same household as their brother. Story 10. He accumulated a significant drug debt with his dealer. The dealer then assaulted him, forced him to destroy his own car with a baseball bat, and made him lick blood off the dealer's shoes in front of his girlfriend. He has since turned his life around. Life is good. Story 11. The two main individuals became alcoholics and drug addicts, experiencing numerous stints in jail. Another became a police officer. Fitting. One became a principal and athletic director. Again, fitting. Story 12. Paz is a successful lawyer who married his high school sweetheart and has 2 children. I hope his children never experience what I went through as a child. Story 13. I had a terrible bully named Kelly. We were in a private parochial school in a small town in Alabama, with about 15 people in the class. She had it out for me from the very beginning in 5th grade. She would have boys kick me and had control over everyone, really making my life difficult daily for 3 years. One day, I came home after living elsewhere, probably 8 to 10 years later. My dad had saved a newspaper article for me, telling the story of what happened to Kelly. Since high school, it seemed she had 2 children and was a single mother, struggling with a drug problem and facing financial difficulties. She took her kids, stole a car, drove to her drug dealer's house, and robbed him at gunpoint. Afterward, she used drugs in the car with her children and got caught, ultimately going to jail. It was actually one of the most fascinating newspaper articles I've ever read in my life. Story 14. I got caught stealing cars a few years after we graduated. I never heard from him after he was sent to prison. I hope he is out now and doing something productive with his life, but nobody wants to see him at the reunion. Story 15. He is doing really well. He has a stable job, a nice wife, and seemingly lovely children. Karma is not a real concept if you were ever curious. Not that I care or want him to struggle in life in any way. Story 16. Mine later came out as gay and, get this, married someone with the same first name as me. It's definitely a strange coincidence. But what are the odds? I do not have an exceptionally common first name either. Story 17. He got into a fight at a bar with some truck drivers. They pinned his head against a tire and kicked him unconscious. Now, he has the mental capacity of a 7-year-old. Story 18. Remember the ice bucket challenge? It was when people dumped ice water on each other for charity about 10 years ago. A group of bullies at my school tricked an autistic student into participating in the challenge, but instead of water, they filled the bucket with spit, feces, urine, and tobacco, and poured it onto him. I recall it being a significant event locally at the time. The perpetrators were eventually identified and caught. Regarding punishment, I am not certain about all of them, but at least the oldest one, who I think was 18 and possibly facing serious consequences, took a plea deal to avoid jail time and only received probation. However, a condition of his probation was that he would have to undergo a similar experience to what he put the autistic student through. Except it took place on a dairy farm. Yes, such unusual punishments do occur, and there are numerous examples of them. The short legal story is that the defendants in these cases could easily appeal to have such sentences overturned, but then they would serve a normal jail sentence, which they want to avoid. Judges have a wide range of discretion in imposing probation conditions. When I heard about it, I thought he was getting off too easily. No prison time and a punishment that would last only a couple of minutes at most. However, someone managed to obtain a video of his punishment, which circulated around the school for a while. They used a manure tanker. The substance poured onto him for a good 45 seconds, and he was vomiting and gagging. It was quite satisfying and fitting, I suppose. Thankfully, the video has been removed from various platforms since then. I wouldn't want that to haunt him for the rest of his life. He likely learned his lesson. Story 19. She is working dead-end jobs and seems to have been on drugs at one point. However, she is still skinny, so by her logic, she has succeeded. Story 20. I dislike this question because it suggests there was only one. It involved nearly the entire town within 5 years of my age. When I examine crimes in my hometown, the perpetrator is always close to my age. This does not surprise me. They were all malicious. Examples include murder, use of explosives, arson against a spouse, arson of a residence, theft, and drug-related offenses. Recently, there was a car crash that killed 2 individuals in their 20s. The driver was around my age. Story 21. Died in a car crash while I was in university. What gets me the most is that, despite everyone knowing how he treated me, he didn't stop in school. He continued this behavior in college and even in town, where we just crossed paths. He even admitted to breaking my moped to try and get me to crash on the way home. He took out every screw on the fairing and loosened the steering nut. I forget the exact term, but when I got it checked out because it felt off, they said that one big turn could have led to a serious accident. Everyone insists he was a good man. Story 22. He came into the bar where I was managing with his newly married wife. When I went by their table to check on them, he sincerely apologized, introduced me to his wife, and mentioned how much of a bad guy he had been to me back in high school. He took full responsibility, and it was a very nice gesture. Story 23. He ended up in prison for the sexual assault of a minor. He messaged her on Facebook and gave her a lot of vodka before assaulting her while she was passing in and out of consciousness. Story 24. She is happily married and has a lovely family. She apologized after high school, and I will see her around. She is doing well. Other bullies? I am a millennial, so mostly multi-level marketing schemes. Story 25. Gained weight and developed adult acne. He made fun of me for it. Karma is not kind. Additionally, he is balding, and I am aware of his insecurities. Story 26. One of them died of a brain tumor before finishing college. That was sad. He was not one of the worst. After that, I have forgotten most of their names, so I have no idea. Story 27. I befriended him again years later, and we hang out sometimes. He is a wedding planner, and I am a heavy diesel mechanic. I think I won in the end, although he gets free food, which sounds pretty good. Story 28. I grew up, graduated, moved away, and intentionally stopped thinking about them. Turns out that was a very good move for me. They've been practically forgotten, and my life is so much better without them. Story 29. It turned out to be a nice person who now has a wonderful girlfriend, and he is doing well in life. Good for him, he didn't stay a bad kid. Story 30. He died of old age in his sleep, which is better than he deserved. He was not well liked by many people. It has been nearly a decade, and I hear his grave is still frequently disrespected. Story 31. She gained a significant amount of weight and married a man with intellectual disabilities. They have 5 children, 3 of whom have the same or similar disabilities. She struggles to manage all of this, and I have no sympathy. Story 32. After an incident involving him injuring a classmate and me, he was confronted by my older friends, for which I am still grateful. My brother had a serious conversation with him that left him quite embarrassed. Years later, I heard the bully had matured and become more likable, though he still had a bit of an unpleasant attitude. I hope he is in a better place mentally. Story 33. I had a middle school bully, but I offered to fight him after school, and he said he had to catch the bus. Then, he started sitting with me and my friends at lunch. Story 34. I completely dominated him when I was 20. He had bullied me around the playground when I was 13. I knew my day would come when I grew up. Story 35. He died in a car accident when he was around 30. That was almost 20 years ago, and I would react differently today. At the time, I was happy to hear it and do not hide that fact. Story 36. My bully dropped out in our junior year. For years later, he was still hanging out with high school kids, buying alcohol for them. One of them got into an accident and reported him. The last I heard, he received a couple of years in prison. Story 37. He died of ignorance a few years after high school. Nobody was surprised. Nobody cared. Even his older sister said he got what he deserved. Some people just do not belong here. Story 38. I have no idea, but my best guess is that he eventually served the prison time he received shortly after graduation for drug-related offenses and violence. He likely got out, made poor choices again, and returned to prison 2 or 3 more times. They may still be caught in that cycle. Story 39. One has since died, one I haven't seen since the actual bullying, but I have occasionally bumped into his sister, and one became a lawyer. I am certain I ran into another when I went to a small corner store in the middle of nowhere, about an hour from where we grew up. He was working the counter at the store. I don't know if it was him, but I didn't stick around long enough to find out. The face, particularly the eyes, were very distinct. He always had that look as if he was looking right through you. Creepy vibes. Oh, and another was arrested about 10 years ago for attempted murder or something like that. Story 40. One of them went to jail for sleeping with a minor. The other ended up marrying the daughter of a prominent figure in Johnson & Johnson. Sometimes the wicked prosper. Story 41. She struggled with severe addiction to drugs and sex, experienced a manic episode associated with bipolar disorder, refused help, became homeless after her parents had enough, gained significant weight, nearly overdosed, contracted multiple sexually transmitted diseases, suffered a heart attack on the streets at 25, was involuntarily hospitalized, and now uses a dating app looking much older than her age, trying to find her perfect match while taking care of 2 children and working at a home improvement store. I am transferring to university with honors as a dual major and likely to attend either medical or law school, with my own place, money in the bank, and more friends than I ever thought possible. Perhaps karma is real. Story 42. Became a state senator and was his party's favorite to be their nominee for governor. He spent a lot of time campaigning against COVID-19 vaccines and mask mandates. He died of COVID-19. Story 43. Alternative perspective. I was the bully. I ended up in minor trouble due to my violent temper, but I eventually realized how much of a jerk I was. I became a better person in almost every way and now work as a productive office worker. I am happily married. Story 44. An older bully spent my freshman year bothering me on the bus. 2 years later, I applied for a job. He took me under his wing and showed me the ropes. 3 months later, he left me with a great opportunity for a teenager like me. Story 45. I mean, it's hard to keep track of nearly an entire graduating class. The one teacher who was aware of it is, as far as I know, still there teaching. Story 46. Oddly enough, I ran into him at a bar yesterday while visiting my hometown. He has worked nothing but dead-end jobs and has drunk his youth away. I shared everything I had done over the last 20 years, and he seemed very envious. I hung out with him for a little while and bought him a few rounds. Eventually, he started crying and apologized for how he treated me in high school. I told him it was part of what made me who I am. I gave him my number and told him if he ever needed to talk or was in my area, to give me a call. Story 47. Regardless of people sharing stories about their bullies, the best thing you can do is hope they grow and change, as we all do from our school days. If that is the case, acknowledge their growth and give them the respect they deserve for evolving into decent human beings. However, if they are still acting poorly after 20 years, it is best to disregard them. Story 48. He took his own life. I had heard he had a difficult life, but he made many children's lives miserable, so I felt no sympathy for him. Story 49. There was a bully named Tim who took great joy in antagonizing me. 2 years after graduation, I was working at a bank when a few people from high school came in, all dressed in black suits or dresses. I asked them what they were up to and why they were all dressed in black. One of them said, "We're going to Tim's funeral." He got high on PCP and ran at a police officer with a meat cleaver. The police officer shot him dead. I was shocked for about a minute, then thought, couldn't happen to a more deserving person. Tim's best friend from high school got a job at a fast food restaurant as an assistant manager. We've now been out of high school for over 30 years, and he's still an assistant manager at that same restaurant. Story 50. Unemployed in my mid-30s with little savings and struggling with depression. I was my own worst bully. I still am. Story 51. I wasn't harassed daily by this girl. We were cool in grade school, but all of a sudden in junior high, she would sneer at me if I acknowledged her or crossed paths. She had a difficult home life. I didn't. I think it had something to do with that. Anyway, I moved back home after graduating college. I saw her in a pizza restaurant with two young children and a man who looked at least 10 years older than her. She was pregnant and hissing at the kids to sit down and be quiet. She looked miserable. Story 52. How should I know? I don't think about people like that in my life. I would rather think about the people who helped me in life, not those who hurt me. Story 53. She dropped out of high school and had a child with a person with a disability. She lives in a remote area and is supported by her parents. Story 54. Guy is in his 40s and works for a moving company that transports items around my workplace. I'm sure it's not much above minimum wage. Story 55. Bald, unattractive, and at 30 years old, he looks like he's in his 50s. French-Canadian genes do not joke around. I hope he's unhappy. Story 56. I confronted a group of patched bikers from an outlaw club in a local bar. I was beaten and remained in a coma from 1975 until my death in 2010. Story 57. One is a drug addict with an extensive criminal history. The other seems to have a normal life, with a stable job, marriage, and a child. Although he does appear to be using steroids, it is ironic that he married a woman who is overweight, which is exactly what he used to bully me about. Story 58. I moved out of town for unrelated reasons and returned to chill with friends. I ran into him at a small gathering. He pulled me aside and apologized for his behavior in high school. I told him that no one has their life completely together during that time, but the fact that he cared enough to acknowledge it and say something deserved respect. Story 59. One person died of a heroin overdose. I was surprised that I felt nothing when I found out he had died. He left behind a wife and son. He used to scare me significantly. I wish I felt worse about his death, but I do not. This makes me feel worse about myself. Another person became the president of his father's bank. I saw him at a bar decades later. He appeared just as foolish and ogre-like, but was clearly wealthy. He still behaved like a brutal individual. He recently opened another bank and was featured in a newspaper article boasting about allowing a local person with disabilities to come in and sort dollar bills for a few hours a week. I hope someone disrupts his life every day for the rest of his existence. Story 60. Funny enough, the bullies in my secondary school class all ended up as insurance or property agents. 3 of them even approached me separately a few years later to try to sell me insurance or offered to act as my agent if I ever wanted to sell my home. Story 61. Stalkers at the local grocery store or petrol station look away when they see me now. One of them is unhealthily skinny, whereas he used to be sporty and heavier. It makes you wonder what the situation at home is like for them. To clarify, I have nothing against shop employees. Story 62. The worst one, I don't even remember his name. He was the new kid in 6th grade who used a strategy of identifying a chubby, unusual kid and bullying him to gather a circle of like-minded friends. One of them was my best friend, who eagerly joined the cool crowd by bullying me as well. I remember the name of that bully well. He became heavier than me and then passed away in his 30s or 40s. Story 63. He got a well-paying city job right out of college. He lost it a few years later after being caught on tape admitting he got the job by promising to do favors for corrupt individuals. I saw him at a wedding a few years later, and he told me he spent his honeymoon in Nuremberg, Germany, to see where the Hitler rally took place and to feel its power. Story 64. Died in a high-speed car crash about a year after graduating. Couldn't have happened to a more deserving person. Story 65. Well, after threatening to throw me over a 3-story school balcony, which would have been fatal, he went on to actually kill someone else. He spent the next 12 years in a Rawlins prison and is now a welder in a small town in the middle of nowhere. Top shelf life there. Story 66. Not high school, but elementary school. I was in jail for robberies, drug dealing, and stealing televisions and other items from homes. I have never been less surprised in my life. Story 67. He joined the Marines and was killed in Afghanistan. I read the casualty report while I was in the Air Force. He had his flaws, but he didn't deserve that. I visit his grave regularly and am good friends with his family. Story 68. We reconnected years later. She reached out and I asked for an apology, which she gave me. I forgave her and let go of all the hate. I am not interested in a friendship with her now, but I am happy for the closure. Story 69. Years later, I went to find him on Facebook and was planning to meet up with him to confront him. I found him. His profile picture showed his head wrapped in bandages. He has a brain tumor. I decided I didn't need to do anything. Story 70. I didn't have many friends. By high school, I had learned to avoid other kids and spent as much time as possible working alone in a computer lab. Story 71. I'm very old now, but I saw him at my 10-year reunion. I was having a particularly good year. Great job in publishing, thin, fabulous haircut. Just one of those times in your life when you have it all together for a moment. Scott used to bully me daily and thought it was hysterical. I stood up for myself, but it was such a disappointment to have to fight with him every day in high school. He walked up to me at the reunion, and it just came out of my mouth. He said, "Emily, you look amazing." And I replied, "Thanks, Scott. You look bald." He hung his head and said, "I deserve that. Nice one." Story 72. He moved to another state with his mother in 1993. Fast forward to 2010, my girlfriend at the time and I were hanging out with her friend and her friend's husband. The husband and I were talking when I casually mentioned that he had been my bully. He began crying and shared that he was experiencing abuse from his father. We remain very close to this day. Story 73. He got his girlfriend pregnant when she was about 19 or 20, and he was in his early 20s. The child, a boy, was born with severe disabilities. I also discovered that he had a difficult family life while growing up, which helped me move on. I don't hold a grudge against him and wish his family well. Story 74. He wasn't a high school bully, but an elementary school one. I have no idea what he's doing career-wise, but he is balding at 22, which is a win in my books. Story 75. His brother murdered him, which is rare in Australia. He was a horrible person, but I wouldn't have wished that on him. Story 76. I believe the last I heard. She is a teacher. She and 3 other girls would sabotage me on the bus. I was always afraid they would corner me somehow. I didn't feel comfortable using the public bathroom throughout 7th grade. Story 77. I had several bullies in elementary school through early high school. There are 3 categories. A couple of them have real jobs. Horrifying to me, they tend to be blue-collar management. One I recall managed crews that set up and tore down events and conventions. A couple of others manage construction. I wonder if they take advantage of their customers or just abuse their workers. One individual got a job with the city and worked there his entire life in maintenance. We're both in our mid-50s, and I haven't spoken to him since high school, but he just retired. A couple of them are surviving but don't seem to have real jobs. They are handyman types or work job to job in construction. One individual is a car mechanic. It looks like he does a lot of fixing minor dents in cars out of his apartment. I've seen one person on disability, possibly working side jobs for cash to get around the income limits to keep the checks coming. I have at least 2 bullies who are brothers. One has a single social media post stating he was entering rehab after 35 years of drinking. By my calculation and the date of the post, that put him starting at age 12 at the time, which fits my memories. His brother had 10 to 15 posts over a few years, with the topic of almost every post being Miller Genuine Draft. I wonder what the 3rd brother is up to. Story 78. I was a high school bully. I wasn't the worst, but there's no denying I was one. I had a moment of clarity and shame as a young adult after having a child. In short, I became aware of myself. Story 79. I don't know and I don't care. I even threw out my yearbook because he ruined high school for me. I should have just dropped out and earned my general educational development certificate. It's not like I was going to be a lawyer or a doctor. Story 80. Well, exactly what I always knew would happen to them and was scared of it happening to me. All of them stayed in our hometown, have dead-end jobs, married the only person they have slept with in their early 20s, and will probably start cheating in a couple of years. Males also drink every day. Story 81. He works at a bank, has a nice wife and children, and is just a regular guy. Unlike what everyone says, not every bully gets their comeuppance. Story 82. A middle school bully, over half my life ago, was recently arrested for assault with a deadly weapon. I always knew he was not a good person. Story 83. Last I heard, she became addicted to drugs, and her mother is taking care of her children. She was a bully because her childhood was difficult. I knew that even then, but all I wanted was for her to leave me alone. She made me miserable throughout middle school. I hope her children have a better chance, but in a small town, the cycle will likely continue. Story 84. If I remember correctly, he has a child. I assume he is married. I was friends with him on Facebook because I did not want to deal with the conflict of rejecting him at that time. I saw him at the gas station a few years after graduation and ignored him out of pettiness. I did not truly move on from the pain of high school until I was in my late 20s. Everyone disliked me back then, so reflecting on it now makes me feel unwell. Story 85. We didn't have any bullies in my high school. Everyone was friendly and cooperative. There were a few individuals who used marijuana, but they were nice as well. Story 86. He wasn't really a bully, just a guy who annoyed me and a lot of other people. We became friends towards the end of school, but we don't talk much nowadays. He is living a fairly normal life and working in sports marketing in Australia. Story 87. He died diving into a river with his friends. They were drunk, and when he didn't come out, they ran away because they were afraid of getting in trouble instead of taking action. Another individual is in jail after breaking into a car dealership and vandalizing the floor. He also broke into a small apple orchard and stole candy. It does get better. Story 88. I don't know and I don't care. Aside from reading and posting in threads like these, I never think about them. Story 89. Doing pretty well by the looks of it. He still seems to be dating the same girl from high school, who is now a model. Story 90. Nothing, because I was one of the cool kids. Just kidding. It was my dad who bullied me, and nobody knew. He is sad in an empty apartment somewhere. I hope he is doing well, and I see him before he passes away. Story 91. I have no idea what happened to any of them because I honestly do not care anymore. However, if I had to guess, they all went on to raise problematic children of their own. Story 92. Living a great life, sadly. I think he went on to own a construction business and has a beautiful wife. I only remembered him because a girl I had a crush on was hanging around him. The guy was always naturally big and worked out constantly. Story 93. In elementary school, there was a kid who was a grade ahead of me and relentlessly bullied me for years. He stole from me and was racist towards me, despite being the same race. Fast forward 20 years later, I'm a director at a small bank and I receive a request to reverse fees for a customer because he's struggling financially. Who does it turn out to be? The bully. I take the high road and approve the request. When I see him, I realize I've lost my baby fat, but he hasn't. Felt good. Story 94. He is a window washer. It turns out he was being abused by his father. I have wounds because he took my childhood innocence, but I guess it happens to everyone. It feels like I should say I feel sad for him, but he humiliated me so much. It is just unfortunate. Story 95. He was arrested for writing graffiti on the front counter of the police station while reporting in for parole. If he mattered at all, I would have saved the newspaper article in which the judge called him a fool. Good job, Wayne. Story 96. Nearly ruined his life with drugs. My dad fought with his father and he never touched me again. I saw him looking very thin, but last year I saw him in the store looking healthy. He apologized profusely. I forgave that long ago, but I'm kind of glad it's been on his mind. I hold no hate. Story 97. Not my bully, but a bully to many girls. At 15 or 16, she attempted suicide by hanging, was taken to the hospital, and was later released. She then took her own life probably a month later. I saw the way she treated people. She literally broke them down. I am in my 40s now and still do not feel pity for her. Story 98. He didn't bully me specifically, but there was one guy in middle school who hit another kid in the head with a tennis racket, causing blood everywhere. The kid was hospitalized. The bully has had a drug problem in his adult life, found religion, and is now living with his wife and children. I have no idea what he is like as a person. Story 99. He fell asleep intoxicated while frying French fries. The stove and pot caught fire, and he died from smoke inhalation. Story 100. They are all stuck in dead-end jobs in my home country, desperately trying to make money. Meanwhile, the tattoos on my arms cost more than their annual salaries. Story 101. I had 3 individuals who picked on me regularly. One is a drug dealer. Another gained a lot of weight. The third came out as gay and apologized for his behavior towards me in our youth. Story 102. Last I heard, she was facing federal prison time for related fraud. I don't know the details and I don't care. Story 103. Guy had a troubled home life and took his frustration out on me. He was verbally and physically abused by his father and dealt with it by making fun of my appearance. Guy was in every lower-level remedial class and eventually dropped out. He later went to jail and became an irresponsible father to children he had outside of marriage. I couldn't have imagined a more fitting ending for him, to be honest. Story 104. The grade school bully targeted her 3rd child before high school graduation. The high school bully was punched in the face twice. We became friends afterward. Story 105. Scott graduated high school and used his free time to become the village idiot. He was often intoxicated, frequently arrested, and made a nuisance of himself. Members of the Veterans of Foreign Wars gave him a job, but they caught him stealing money from the bar. One night, he was arrested for driving under the influence. Officers taunted him that this was his 5th offense and that his life was about to become noticeably worse. He hung himself in the cell later that evening. The joke around town was that property values increased once Scott was removed from the population. Story 106. She owns a boutique now and wants to sell my jewelry. I said no thank you. Maybe lead with an apology next time when asking people you've bullied for things to benefit your business. Story 107. He was so obnoxious and stupid that I had to look him up. Of course, I found an obituary thinking he might be some Darwin Award winner, but nope. That was his father. Further digging revealed that he went into insurance and financial planning. He had many credentials listed on LinkedIn: Bachelor of Arts, Certified Financial Planner, Chartered Life Underwriter, Chartered Financial Consultant, Chartered Health Specialist, Estate Planning Counselor, and Certified Estate Advisor. The Estate Planning Counselor designation is interesting. Is he helping older people plan for retirement, or more likely conning them out of their life savings? There was a news report about his vacation home being destroyed in Hurricane Irma. There were also many disciplinary hearings in the insurance industry, which I totally expected. However, it turns out he works for the Insurance Disciplinary Board and was sitting in judgment of even worse scumbags than himself. So strange. I expected a long criminal record. Maybe they just haven't caught him yet. Story 108. I don't know if she bullied me, but she made my life harder than it needed to be. However, she developed a strange illness right after we graduated and passed away. Story 109. Which one? In my freshman year, one of the students bit me, leaving a mark on my arm. My sibling pulled him across the table and told him to never touch me again. The principal said, "If he ever does something, just punch him, and I'll tell you to enjoy your time off after I suspend you." Earlier this month, while recapping that incident during a psychological evaluation, I mentioned, well, it doesn't really matter because that guy is dead now anyway, since he passed away earlier this year. That comment surprised the therapist, as she couldn't contain her laughter and said, "Not many things cause me to break, but that was one of them." Story 110. He joined as a volunteer firefighter and died when the burning building he was in collapsed on him. He is survived by his wife and 2 young children. Story 111. I heard from my high school best friend that he and his older brother, who was just as troublesome, ended up in a 12-step program and reached out to several people to apologize for being rude to everyone but me. Their cousin, who also attended school with us, went no contact with them after this program, so I assume they are still unpleasant. I don't really care either way. I have a great life, and whatever is happening to them does not affect me at all. Story 112. He is a local homeless person. His mind is so affected by drugs that I don't even think he remembers who he is anymore. Story 113. 5 children, 1 born addicted and 1 terminated due to complications. This situation motivated her to stay clean for a while, but she has relapsed. Story 114. He bullied me for being gay. He never graduated high school, and I saw him on Tinder a few years later. I had never swiped left faster in my life. Story 115. Stood at the local council for a far-right party despite being from an immigrant family. Received almost no votes. The individual is not particularly intelligent. Genuinely one of the least intelligent people I have encountered in my life. Story 116. I never really cared to look up 1 or 2 of them. It's similar to the rest of that town. Once you reach a certain level of education, income, and life experience, you tend to stop concerning yourself with the less fortunate in your rural community and move on with your life. But to your point, I hope they are doing well wherever they are. I just don't have the motivation to find out. Story 117. There were a few. One person, who shares my first name, was recently arrested for the 11th time for domestic abuse. He looks like meth and alcohol have taken a toll on him for the last 20 years. Another was killed by someone after he became confrontational, but this time he miscalculated his target. Neither my friends nor I were surprised and were actually kind of glad because he was a harmful individual, and his potential future victims can now live without the threat he posed. Another died with a needle in his arm. So, fortunately, there were no successful bullies from my past. They pretty much got what they deserved in the end. Story 118. Many of them gave me money at the last reunion. I am the class treasurer. One individual, however, avoided me the whole time. Story 119. There were no bullies in high school. As a child, a few older kids attempted to bully us a couple of times, but we immediately responded by throwing rocks at them. That solved the problem quickly. Story 120. I had several. All but one of them are either deceased or incarcerated. The only one who isn't has since made amends with me, but he is moving out of state next month. Story 121. She has 5 children, the first one shortly after graduation with a father who had issues with the law, and she works for Verizon. Story 122. He continually advanced in his career due to the wealth of his parents until he was caught defrauding a company of $35 million. He hasn't faced any consequences for that, as far as I can tell. He may still be in the courts, but he's still out there doing his thing. Story 123. He became a registered nurse and is actually a very skilled and caring member of the medical group. He has changed a lot. Story 124. About 20 years after graduation, I saw him in a documentary on a news channel. He had become a social worker and started a large program against bullying in schools. Schools would hire him, and he would go into classes with bullying problems and conduct exercises to prevent further bullying. In school, he was the most difficult person I have ever met, and I continue to wonder whether he truly had a change of heart or was just pretending to make money. Story 125. She is overweight and has a 2-year-old child at the age of 20. I hope her child has a better upbringing and does not follow a negative path. Story 126. Life had hit him hard. He lost his mother and father and was in a downward spiral. I forgave him and gave him a job. He now has his own plumbing business, and we play video games once a week. I attended his wedding last month. Not a week goes by that I don't admire his courage to own up to his past mistakes and strive to be better. Story 127. He was holed up with his girlfriend in a hotel room and held her hostage with a gun. When the hotel manager answered her call for help, he fired his gun at the door of the hotel. When law enforcement arrived on the scene, he shot his gun out the window at the police officers. They took him down by sending K-9 units into the hotel room, where one grabbed his leg and the other injured his gun hand. He is currently in jail for multiple crimes, including assaulting a police officer, reckless discharge of a firearm, and wanton destruction of property. Story 128. Got pregnant immediately after high school. Now she has a few kids. She never figured out if the father stayed or not. Story 129. He wanted to be important in a criminal organization, but he ended up being shot. To summarize his life: school, a criminal job, prison, and getting out 2 weeks before endless sleep. Story 130. He remains the same person as before. Now, however, he wears a gold chain crucifix and shares Bible quotes on Facebook. Story 131. These comments are either he apologized to everyone and became a good person, or he is a criminal and drug addict charged with homicide. Story 132. He finally started taking his attention deficit hyperactivity disorder medication and stopped being constantly online. He has a child now, and it seems like he is making an honest effort to be a father, so I believe he has matured. Story 133. My high school bully tried to add me as a friend on Friendster, and I said no way. He was very mean to me and my friend, and he was the most controlling person ever. Story 134. 15 years later, I can't even remember their names except for the teacher who bullied me, but I honestly have no idea if she is still alive. I moved away from that town and disappeared after graduation. Those individuals made my life difficult for the 1 year I spent at that school and for a couple of years afterward while I dealt with post-traumatic stress disorder. My goal during my healing journey was to forget their names and faces, and I'm almost completely there. Story 135. A few years after high school, I joined a group chat with several kids I was somewhat friends with. They were more his friends, so naturally he was in there too. Over the years, I have had first-hand experience watching him get married and have a baby while I am still struggling to find a job. Story 136. I never had just one. Many guys messed with me. Some got bored because I ignored them, some got punched in the face for being foolish enough to put their hands on me, and the third group consisted of the smart ones who saw or heard about the second group and realized it was a bad idea. Story 137. One of them broke her leg in gym, hours after telling me to end my life. Seeing her taken out in the ambulance was the last time I saw her. Story 138. The females became nurses or hairdressers, while the males became car salesmen, prison guards, or local religious group singers. Story 139. He lives alone in a trailer. He would mock everyone with a deep hatred for any non-straight, non-white males during high school. Now, his own cousin, whom he was very close to, is openly gay and has essentially abandoned him. He stalks underage girls in the area on social media and tries to get them to meet him. He threatens anyone who approaches his trailer with a shotgun. He remains, if not more so, a repulsive person. Story 140. This may not be popular with the Reddit community, but he became a successful day trader. He is worth approximately $5 million and lives in a mansion. He grew up poor as well, so it wasn't his father or mother helping him out. Story 141. Elementary school. We both transferred to a much bigger public school, and I became more athletic. Eventually, my friend circle grew larger through sports and gym activities. He later transferred to a private school. I heard that he died from a heroin overdose shortly after. Story 142. A person who assaulted me with a brick, attempted to set me on fire, and waited with friends to attack me has since become transgender and moved away. Story 143. He got his girlfriend pregnant, joined a motorcycle club affiliated with the Hells Angels, apologized to me one day, and then was incarcerated for shooting a bear in public. Story 144. I have no idea. I recall their individual trespasses against me, but I do not recall their names, not even their first names. I am glad of that. Considering how my life has turned out, I wouldn't be surprised if they are all doing much better than me today. The people from my past, those I didn't go to high school with and whose names I do remember, whether they were friends, enemies, or somewhere in between, are all doing very well, much better than I am. Story 145. He died. A brutal car accident occurred. He was thrown from a convertible and impaled on a tree. Backstory. We were friends, or so I thought, but he nearly killed me while we were in the woods by hitting me over the head with a tree branch. Ironically, he knocked me out and continued to beat me while I was unconscious, according to another friend who was there and eventually got him to stop. My parents didn't involve the police, but instead had a sit-down meeting with me, him, and his parents. He claimed to feel insulted when I supposedly insulted his mother, which I did not do. We all agreed to never speak again, and we never did. He never left that small town, and I don't think he had many other friends after the story spread. There have been other bullies, but I mostly became friends with them after either defeating them in a fight or as we grew up. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.